Every once in a while, people in Indiana find things. Extraordinary things. Things that were made by ancient people thousands of years ago and hint at a mysterious past. People of a certain age remember artifacts at Indiana courthouses and county museums. Strangely, many have disappeared over time. One day they were there, and then they were gone. It's very odd, maybe a little too odd, perhaps even on purpose. The question is there anything left to see? The surprising answer is yes, but only if you know where to look. The Midwest has a surprising number of ancient sites, forgotten cities, and earthworks hidden in the woods. Come along for an adventure through Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, and Kentucky as we visit remarkable ancient sites, museums, and search for relics of a lost world. Growing up in Indiana, I heard about these things called Indian Mounds. The subject was never taught in school, so I had many questions. I'd see them on maps, and it raised my curiosity. Who actually built these? And what were they for? In southern Indiana was the Angel Mounds State Historic Site, a place with both a museum and a large city of ancient mounds. My visit helped me understand what mounds actually were, and a little about the people that made them. As there's no written records, there are many interpretations of whom they were. We can only make guesses from the artifacts and structures that they left behind. Some mounds were built for ceremonies, thus they are called ceremonial mounds. They dominated the landscape of ancient cities. There were platform mounds where important people lived. These could be chieftains and nobles, or people of medicine and magic. There are effigy mounds, built to look like animals. Enclosure mounds, with one way in and one way out. They also constructed massive city walls made of earth and clay. Some of these were many miles long. Others were constructed with posts, straw, and mud. Some of these examples were over 14 feet tall. My main interest became the older, cone-shaped burial mounds. Though the shape was simple, there were many layers underground, and these held priceless treasures. These mounds had burial chambers made of stone, both below and above ground, and were connected by a shaft. The burial chambers also had stone covers, creating a vault. These were very well designed, and some have been here for over 5,000 years. The shaft was roughly 10 feet in diameter, and the chambers as big as 12 by 8 feet. There were variations on the theme, with some skeletons buried in the sitting position. The bottom chamber usually had only one individual. There were weapons and jewelry, suggesting a chieftain or person of importance. Sometimes, the person would be buried with many skulls beside them, suggesting to archaeologists that these were the heads of enemies. Nearby trash mounds often held both animal and human bones. Even the human ones had tool marks, suggesting cannibalism. Stone burial chambers are not a common feature of any later Native American group. In fact, they have more in common with ancient Egyptian burials, or even Vikings for that matter. Many other cultures have a history of stone burial vaults. Before Indiana had an archaeology office, it was an acceptable hobby to plunder burial mounds. People found stone axes, mortars for grinding grain, simple drills for making holes in hides and other items, items to play games, but also pottery unlike later Native American design. The complexity in design meant that they had a great deal of time to make them. They were not hunter-gatherers. The patterns look like those from Mesoamerica, notably the Aztecs. These unknown people made musical instruments such as single and panpipes. But what set these ancients apart was their use of copper. In the oldest Adena mounds, spearheads made of copper were discovered, as well as many types of other blades. They made copper decorations and jewelry. There were items known as gorgets with one or more drilled holes. These were thought to be jewelry. But if they were very heavy. It's possible that they were something else. Maybe something very revealing. Their artwork looks nothing like later Native American examples. Without a doubt, these are truly mysterious people. And as they lived here thousands of years, they left millions of artifacts. At the Angel Mound site alone, Professor Glenn Black retrieved over 2.5 million artifacts. Some of these were placed on display at the museum, while most went to Indiana University, including human remains. But out of 2.5 million artifacts, neither museum had much on display. It felt like something important was being hidden. And after traveling hundreds of miles to prehistoric places in 5 states and many, many museums, I discovered I wasn't wrong. When you're chasing an ancient mystery, it makes sense to start at the very beginning. The ancient Adena, Hopewell, and 4 ancient cultures had a very heavy presence in Ohio before moving west into Indiana. If I could see the relics and earthworks of these ancient people, I'd know what to look for in Indiana. I explored 9 ancient sites, and what I found was very revealing. The tallest known mound in Ohio is the Miamisburg Mound in Miamisburg. It was built over 2,000 years ago by the Adena people. It's 65 feet tall, but seems much taller when you climb it. At the top, you can see everything, seemingly for miles. That's likely not an accident. These mounds are typically near major waterways, and this one is no exception, with the Great Miami River to the west. Throughout Ohio, there are many other Adena mounds, complete with stone burial chambers. In this case, the artifacts are no longer here. The Adena also built amazing structures in Indiana, and some of them were quite large, such as the Obertine Fort at Hardinsburg. The hilltop was surrounded by an earthen wall and had a tower overlooking the valley. The ancient complex at Newcastle, and the incredible earthworks at Mounds State Park. It includes an ancient clock, one that predicts solstices and equinoxes. These so-called primitive people weren't all that primitive. The Fort Ancient site at Oregonia, Ohio, is so named for a massive earth wall, one that encloses an entire hilltop. It was built by the Hopewell culture about 1,900 years ago, though it has been associated with the Fort Ancient people. It's the largest prehistoric hilltop enclosure in the United States, with walls spanning 3.5 miles and covering 100 acres. It is absolutely massive. It's hard to believe that something like this exists, and not everyone knows about it. The museum has some of the more exotic artifacts. These people worked with copper and made spearheads, breastplates, tools, jewelry, and other decorative items. The resemblance to Mesoamerican artifacts is unmistakable, especially the Aztec culture. This was echoed by Professor John Collette, a pioneer in Indiana archaeology. After viewing artifacts from a hilltop at Marome, Indiana, he called the site Fort Azatlan, believing the people might have originated from the Aztec culture. Described by Collette in 1871, the hilltop fort was surrounded by a wall and contained mounds with stone burial chambers. The pottery closely resembled Aztec form and design, combined with copper artifacts found in these stone burial chambers, and how they also resembled Aztec design, was an old mystery finally solved. According to later archaeologists, no. The land is now protected by federal law, but there have been no further studies. The most famous earthwork in Ohio is the Serpent Mound, located at Peoples. At 1,300 feet long, you cannot see it all in a glance. It's not only the largest serpent effigy in North America, it's the largest in the entire world. At one time, you could climb the observation tower for a better look, but it's now closed. In case you were wondering, drones at all of these sites are prohibited by law. There is some debate about whom built it, with the Adena and Fort Ancient cultures in the mix. And here's a fun fact: this site was hit by a large meteorite in antiquity. According to Ohio's senior state geologist, Michael G. Hansen, a circular area of more than 12 square miles suffered utter chaos. 7 cubic miles of rock was smashed. At the center, the Earth is uplifted at least 1,000 feet above its normal position. He also noted magnetic anomalies at Serpent Mound. This is indeed a special and unique place. Somehow, ancient people precisely aligned the head of the serpent to coincide with the summer solstice sunset, and the tail to the winter solstice sunrise. Each year, you can visit Serpent Mound and watch both. There's evidence that the serpent outline represents the constellation Draco, and the curves predict equinoxes. Who exactly are we dealing with? Many might scoff at the complexity, saying, "Oh, I could do that." But try doing it without a star chart, computer, or a known form of measurement. I'll wait. There are many ancient cultures in the Americas that knew their astronomy, also suggesting the mound builders came from there. The area is surrounded by conical mounds, more typical of the Edina culture. Surely, a site this amazing must have great artifacts. But inside the museum is not a lot. One of the most common finds are gorgets, which are thought to be jewelry. If so, they'd be very heavy jewelry indeed. They usually have one drilled hole, but often two. I can only wonder if archaeologists are wrong and their purpose was something else. Were they a simple plumb bob to ensure construction was level? Are they the missing link to measurement or predicting celestial events? Were they stacked together to make a cylinder, like a telescope? Their true purpose is unclear, adding to the mystery. Located at Holton, Indiana, on private property, is another serpent effigy, but not nearly as large. Much of its detail has been lost over time. A satellite provides a much better picture. There's rumored to be a second serpent effigy in Indiana, emphasizing how far these ancient people migrated. But without a written history, there's much we'll never know. Traveling across Ohio, you can see many ancient sites in a day. They're all over the place, and I found many that weren't even on my list. I happened across the Fort Hill Earthworks, southeast of Carmel. In the middle of nowhere, there's a visitor center and a large parking lot. With a dedicated building, I reasoned that there must be a ton of artifacts inside. Arriving at the doors, they were locked. There were no posted hours. Apparently, it's been closed for a while. I was starting to see a pattern. If you drive a little further, there's an even larger parking area. And if you care to hike, there's an enclosure mound on the summit. But on this particular day, I was running out of daylight and had several hundred miles ahead. My next stop was the Seep Earthworks unit at Bainbridge, Ohio. The Hopewell people built this city about 2,000 years ago. This is not only where a sizable ancient earthwork was found, but a mass sculpture. Archaeologists call this an American Indian face, but I didn't get that impression. I also wondered what tribe made sculptures. It has many similarities to Aztec examples, especially the lips and nose. The site was excavated in 1906 and found not only the odd sculpture, but over 100 skeletons. Around the ancient city is a berm made of untold tons of earth. In some places, it was as high as 10 feet, and it circled the city for over 3 miles. You get the uncanny sense of history and the ancient feet that once walked along it. This was not a group of hunter-gatherers, but a people that planned and built a permanent settlement with walls and many unusual structures. This 30-foot tall burial mound dominates the landscape. This place absolutely has presence that suggests so much more. The question anyone should ask themselves is that if thousands of artifacts have been found at these sites after eons of settlement, where are they? The Hopewell Mound Group Unit at Hopewell Culture National Historic Park is about 2,100 years old. Found here were items made of mica, such as a bird claw, outline of a human, and a human hand. Strangely, mica isn't even found in Ohio. These were all mined in North Carolina, around 500 miles away. It sounded like an amazing place, taking up a huge amount of real estate, around 300 acres. It's one of those places that's so big, you can't see it all in one look. In this case, you can't even see it by driving the road next to it. Nearly level to the ground, you can't see much of anything. An aerial photo shows better detail. These large effigies did not have the benefit of tall hillsides, airplanes, or even satellites to ensure good symmetry. Ancient people had a way that's been lost to us. If it's 90 degrees and high humidity, like the day I visited, this is not your first choice for a hike. But I was about to find something much more spectacular. The Mound City Group, also part of the Hopewell Culture National Historic Park, has not only a museum with park rangers, but also a large group of impressive mounds. This ancient 130-acre plaza was created about 2,000 years ago. This one is very similar to the Central Mound at Indiana's Angel Mound site. Perhaps the strangest thing here were beds of mica placed below some of the dead. Mica is not found in Ohio, and as this type is only found in North Carolina, over 500 miles away, it would indicate a person of very high importance. It would be like making a casket today out of pure gold. The map showed that this was the epicenter of a very large settlement. Surely, the museum must have incredible artifacts. I went inside the visitor center with a great deal of enthusiasm, expecting to see many treasures. Inside was a theater describing the mounds and what's known about these ancient people. A learning section for kids, but there wasn't a single artifact on site. Not a single one. This was a pattern that repeated over and over. We have an ancient site. We found amazing artifacts, but have absolutely nothing to show for thousands of years of settlement and over 100 years of excavation. To say the least, I wasn't buying it. I drove a very long distance to the Newark earthworks, realizing that by the time I got there, I might only have 30 minutes or less before the museum closed. When I arrived at the parking lot, I was impressed by a massive earthwork wall. This was a very large ancient city, covering 206 acres. I rushed to see the museum that was a distance into the park, hoping I wasn't too late. I was greeted by a room of exhibits that described this mysterious place. There's a shovel-shaped pendant, items made of copper, and an effigy stone with 2 drilled holes, not unlike the gorgets found at other ancient places. This is the sculpture of a bear, but reading closely, it was a cast replica and not the original. There were descriptions of the other Ohio sites. These are just the big ones. There are literally thousands more. And an impressive alcove. But with only a mannequin and a poster, I could only wonder, did this museum have more items in the past? I saw the entire contents of the museum in under 5 minutes. However, outside was a huge gateway to an ancient city. Walking through them is like walking through history. You can easily imagine hundreds of ancient people walking through this space. But for the life of me, I couldn't visualize what they looked like. The artifacts they created didn't match any modern tribe that exists today. Some would say that later hard times required more simple living, but it just didn't seem to fit. Later Native Americans didn't seem to have any of the remnants of the art, culture, knowledge of metallurgy, or astronomy that these people clearly possessed. If they were descendants, they brought none of that with them. If this was all accomplished with modern machinery, it would take many months, if not years, to dig these deep trenches. Let alone stack all the dirt and pack it down to prevent shifting. These so-called simple people not only planned an ancient metropolis, but according to archaeologists, did it all with woven baskets. Near Cincinnati is an ancient hilltop city called the Shawnee Lookout. While the Shawnee Indians did occupy it later, ancient people built the earthworks way before they arrived. When pioneers asked the Shawnee about this place, the Shawnee said, "We found it." You'll see an earthwork that goes all around the hilltop. and if you care to get into the weeds, several burial mounds. It's one of those places where you sense there's a much bigger story. Something unknown, just below the surface. Studied for well over 100 years. If there were any significant artifacts, they're not here now. Perhaps important artifacts were taken to the capital of Ohio, where they'd be safe in a secure museum. The Ohio History Museum at Columbus seemed like the logical destination. And they did have an exhibit called Following in Ancient Footsteps. The exhibit room is hardly bigger than that of the Newark earthworks. Odd to me is that there isn't more on exhibit. What was their religion like? What did they worship? What did the people look like? Where are all the artifacts? Disturbing to me was a sign that actually says, "Where's all the stuff?" What was once a large exhibit has been taken off display. This is the same story of many exhibits across the Midwest. What is the reasoning? Or put another way, what are they trying to hide? The biggest museum in Cincinnati is the Cincinnati Museum Center. It houses not one but 3 museums, covering the entirety of local history, from prehistory to the present. Even though Cincinnati was a mound builder city, there were no artifacts on display, most notably, one that used to be there. When Cincinnati was being developed, many Adena mounds were destroyed along the Ohio River. Under one of those, located where the UPS hub is today, an unusual carved stone was discovered, now known as the Cincinnati Tablet. Archaeologists aren't certain whether it's just decoration or, more provocatively, actual written language. If it is and can be deciphered, the implications are mind-blowing. We would know specifics about the mound builders and their understanding of the universe. For reference, later Native American tribes did not have a written language. They instead used pictures to convey general stories and ideas, nothing you can translate into specifics. But with its rounded forms, the Cincinnati Tablet looks nothing like those petroglyphs. In fact, it more closely resembles carvings at Aztec temples. Like the Adena, the Aztecs had an understanding of astronomy. They could predict equinoxes and solstices with precision. And their stone carvings have a stylized, rounded appearance. While correlation does not prove causation, it does give us reason to pause. Without a doubt, it's an exciting development for archaeology. However, the Cincinnati Tablet is no longer on display. The reasoning? It's considered a sacred object. A sacred object to whom? No one truly knows whom the mound builders were, and unless someone can translate, we never will. But it's not the only Adena tablet. There are at least 12 examples, including others in Ohio. Kentucky. In West Virginia. Perhaps they're only ancient, abstract art, but if no one is allowed to see and study them, it's a puzzle piece lost. But people have found odd and extremely old things in Indiana for a very long time, and I knew exactly where I was going next. Searching for the truth will cost you. It will cost you gas money, time away from family and friends, and in some cases, your personal safety. Reasonable people will stop when those costs get too high. But apparently, I'm not one of those people. Let me save you some time. Logically speaking, if your state has had a long prehistoric past, you'd expect the state museum to have a ton of artifacts. So I went to the Indiana State Museum in Indianapolis. As of 2024, they've been around for 155 years. They should be loaded. I've read many old reports saying artifacts were sent there. But this lone exhibit is all they're showing. I imagine that they have a great deal in storage, but it's strange to me that this is all they're willing to show. Right next door, the Eiteljorg Museum of American Indians and Western Art doesn't have anything about the mound builders. Nothing at all. It's a little ironic that the land that both museums are on, situated along the White River, was once a mound builder city. If you travel to Frankfort, Kentucky, there's also not much at their state museum. There's an interpretation of how prehistoric people looked, and a shell mound replica. That's about it. It seemed like all the big city museums had put so-called cultural sensitivity ahead of archaeology. It was then that I got a crazy idea, a new method to the madness. What if the answer was hiding in a small town museum, one not regulated by red tape? Museums that received items from local people that had no bias or expectations. In other words, things that were found were displayed. Unlike the big museums that shelve things until they can be explained. And almost without exception, those explanations are extremely biased. So I started an insane quest to visit small-town museums all over Indiana, from the top to the bottom of the state. And here's what I found in a nutshell. The LaPorte County Museum is located at the far northern section of Indiana. With a large building and impressive facade, I couldn't wait to take a look. With 3 floors of displays, it's one of the largest county museums in the state. When I paid my admission, I asked, where can I find the mound builder artifacts? I was told that they had them, but the display was under construction. Literally behind a thin veil, I found what I was looking for. Arrowheads. You always find arrowheads at all the county museums. If you don't see any, they're not even trying. Stone axe heads are also a common theme. Mortars and pistols to grind grain. An ancient cutting board, or maybe something else. The carved effigies are the exciting finds. Where there's art, you find culture, and can start to make connections. I have no idea how any of this could be considered sacred or culturally insensitive, but they've taken it off display nonetheless. While not a county museum, I stopped at the Tippecanoe Battlefield Museum at Battleground, Indiana. There's always a chance that when Native American history is covered from the 1800s, that there will also be even older items. Stone axe heads, a nutting stone. They also had pottery fragments and blades made of Wyandotte chert. What's interesting about that is that Wyandotte chert only comes from one place in the world. Big Wyandotte Cave in southern Indiana, around 210 miles away. This unique rock for the blades was mined by ancient people right here. These people from thousands of years ago definitely got around. I visited the Miami County Museum at Peru. As the area had been a large settlement of Miami Indians, I was hoping for a good collection. This is the largest exhibit of spear and arrowheads in the state of Indiana, hands down. In fact, out of 5 states I visited for this adventure, it beats them all. When most people think of Indiana's native past, they think about 200 years ago. Most of these items were made 2,000 years ago. What we think we know is only a glimpse through clouded glass. I traveled to Wabash County, where they'd spent extensive money on a world-class county museum. They even have a movie theater. On the first floor, they immediately show prehistoric artifacts. There are the usual suspects of arrowheads and stone axes. But they also have some unusual gorgets. This one looks like a prehistoric bottle opener. The academic conclusion is that these are all jewelry worn around the neck on a necklace. Bear in mind that most of these are very heavy and not very attractive. Their shapes suggest a wide variety of other uses. While the amateur archaeologist might see things that aren't there, trained professionals might overlook the obvious, forcing conclusions into reasonable but inaccurate narratives. But the museum I was most excited about was the History Center at Fort Wayne. Having a very long history of indigenous people, they had one of the best exhibits in Indiana. While it only took up one wall, it was one of the best Adena displays that I've ever seen. Spear points? Check. Axe heads? Check. But there was a lot more on that wall. From my fascination with gorgets to this unique piece of jewelry, to see Adena, Hopewell, or Mississippian jewelry anywhere is an absolute rarity. The Randolph County Historical Society at Winchester has an incredible archive. There are descriptions of burial mounds and even an ancient city. It was a large hilltop fort located along the White River and Sugar Creek. For a time, it was the site of their county fair. People sat on the ancient walls to watch events. Later on, walls of the ancient city were used to make bricks, and this building was built from them. The mound at the center of this ancient city, the Fudge Mound, produced some serious artifacts. These were documented with photographs, though like many ancient items, no one really knows where they are now. The Strawtown Kotiwi Park at Noblesville was once an ancient site. Inside their nature center is a display of prehistoric artifacts. Not just arrowheads, but needles made of bone, and ancient pottery. Pottery collections are usually in university archives and set aside for comparative analysis. What impressed me the most was the village outside. Later Native Americans lived in places like these. But since the Adena, four ancient, Hopewell, and Mississippian cultures were thousands of years ago, we don't have any examples. We do have holes in the ground for posts that held up the walls. But going along with my theory that the older the museum, the better the collection, wasn't wrong. Wayne County has a long history of ancient people. In fact, a large city was built east of Nolan's Fork, along with many mounds. The Wayne County Museum at Richmond had one of the best prehistoric artifact collections in the entire state. Little did I know how amazing this stop would be. There were exquisite knives, a variety of points, items to smash nuts, rare remnants of an atlatl. With this ingenious device, a spear could be launched with a great deal more force. Especially important for killing large game like mammoth. There are many good examples of stone axes. Gorgeous. They even have prehistoric ceremonial pipes, which are relatively rare. These are almost always found in Adena stone burial chambers. It's believed that they were filled with herbs and smoked during burial ceremonies. In other words, ancient people might have been getting high at their funerals. Small Town Museum, wonderful prehistoric exhibit. I thought that maybe the Lawrence County Historical Society at Bedford might have some prehistoric items. After all, there are many prehistoric sites within the county. At the Clampett site, human remains and artifacts go back at least 1,000 years. It was thoroughly studied by Indiana University. On the high bluff above Old Palestine, an unusual mound was discovered in the 1850s, known as the Dodd Mound. Like many Adena cities, it was located at a high place along the river. It was about 20 feet in diameter, completely covered in flagstone, and had various underground burial chambers, all made of stone. The first level contained women and children. The second contained men. The bottom layer had 2 skeletons, each over 6.5 feet tall, and adorned with copper jewelry, weapons, and what was described as a war whistle. This is all very characteristic of the ancient Edina culture. Today, no one knows what happened to the artifacts or skeletons. In 1873, Indiana State geologist John Collette described 7 ancient mounds above Connolly Cave, calling them the Connolly Mounds. But instead of dirt, these mounds were made of stone, between 2 and 4 feet tall, and yet were hollow. Professor Collette believed that they were prehistoric houses instead of burial chambers. And to the southwest is an enclosure mound, also a trademark of the Edina culture. To say the least, Lawrence County has a very rich prehistoric past. Despite that, the museum has very few prehistoric items. The universities have came to the county and have taken whatever they found. Believe me when I say, I stop at practically all museums. They may not always have a lot, but there can be surprises. Brown County has a history museum just off Mound Street. As a prehistoric structure was found atop Browning Mountain, the museum was worth a shot. A few arrowheads, a few pottery shards. But if you don't look, you can't find. That's a fact. And if you have a stubborn streak, eventually you'll be rewarded. The Stevens Memorial Museum at Salem has a small but very packed exhibit. But compared to the larger museums, this would be considered a major collection. Case in point, the Evansville Museum is extremely large. But the mound builder artifacts are very few. They are just spread out. The Du Bois County Museum at Jasper is the largest county museum in Indiana, but only has one display case of various points. These were donated by a man that had collected his entire life. Unlike universities and state archaeology departments, county museums aren't actively exploring ancient sites. They only have what's donated. But sometimes that leads to incredible things. The Clark County Museum at Jeffersonville isn't very big. But out of all the Indiana museums, it had the most interesting artifacts. No explanations, just things that were found in Clark County. Like many people, I love a good mystery. And the more puzzle pieces you find, the better your connections become. Then again, you might have pieces to 2 entirely different puzzles. While I felt I was making progress, I still didn't have it. It was time for a major road trip, one that would take me to Illinois, Missouri, and Kentucky. And spoiler alert, I found the smoking gun. There's a fine line between pure dedication and complete obsession. And with this adventure, that line was getting very blurry. Spearheads, stone axes, and mortars didn't tell me much. I was already past that. I wanted to see ancient artwork, something that might actually hint at whom these people were. I got up very early of a morning and drove nearly 4 hours. Over the next 2 days, I'd see amazing things that I'd never seen before. Very likely, things that most people never will. The largest known ancient mound in America is located at Collinsville, Illinois. Situated along the Mississippi River, it's the biggest ancient structure north of Mexico. Built around 950 AD as part of the Cahokia complex, the Monk's Mound is 98 feet tall. That might not seem very tall, but climb it. At the very top, you can see the Gateway Arch in Missouri. It's extremely impressive, and likely so in ancient times. It was named the Monk's Mound, as a Catholic monastery was once built on top of it. One purpose to another, its history in recycling mode. Looking across the landscape, you can see a recreation of a city wall. And many smaller mounds. Small by Cahokia standards, large for Indiana mounds. At one time, the Cahokia Museum had the finest collection of Mississippian culture artifacts. However, it's been closed for several years. In fact, they are closed indefinitely, with no date set for reopening. Right across the Mississippi, where St. Louis is today, was once a city of large mounds and earthworks. But in a time of industry and growth, the mounds were completely destroyed along the riverfront. Many incredible artifacts were found, items made of shell, pearls, copper, silver, and even gold. One would assume that many artifacts would be at the History Museum. But surprisingly, they had nothing at all. I stopped by the Art Museum, thinking that mound builder art might even be there. While there are some examples of later Native American art, there was nothing about the mound builders. A museum so big that a person could get lost in it, and yet not a single gallery for the lost world it replaced. It was like the biggest settlement of ancient people in North America never even existed, but they did. In Marthasville, I visited the grave of Daniel Boone. As I stood there, I thought about all the things I had learned along this journey. Daniel not only fought Indians, but lived with them as an adopted son. They told him stories about an ancient people that were here before they were. They left behind cities that the Shawnee later occupied. There were now two stories, the one told by archaeologists and tribes today, and another told by Indians of the 18th and 19th centuries and recorded in archives. The irony is that Daniel Boone himself has two stories, one that he's buried here at Marthasville, and another that he's buried at Frankfort, Kentucky, because someone took his bones from Missouri. Neither place wants to admit that they're wrong, and neither do archaeologists faced with uncomfortable evidence. They'd rather hide things instead of admitting mistakes. I wasn't going to solve it in one ride across the Midwest, but as they say, tomorrow is another day, and sometimes life can change in a moment. A simple turn along a path can lead to amazing discoveries, ones that can be complete revelations. The next morning, I visited Merrimack Caverns for the third and probably last time in my life. First with my parents and brother, second with my girlfriend and two friends, and now all by myself. This is where outlaw Jesse James hid after robberies, but also where ancient people lived. The story of America's first people is extremely complicated, with multiple cultures coexisting and overlapping in their timeline. Most archaeologists agree that primitive hunter-gatherers crossed a land bridge between Siberia and modern-day Alaska, and these people became the mound builders. But something about that theory just didn't seem right. There were too many things that didn't make sense. The culture was wrong, the artwork was wrong, and the technology was definitely wrong. They went from making tools and weapons out of rock to mining copper and using furnaces to make these same things. They went from wandering aimlessly, looking for food, to building large, complex cities and unusual structures that predicted solstices and equinoxes. And along with that, they developed complex trade networks, moving things hundreds of miles from where they came from, such as mica from North Carolina, seashells and pearls from the Gulf of Mexico, copper from Michigan, it just didn't seem to fit that the primitive and complex people were one and the same. This has led to many theories over the years. The fact that the burial mounds resembled Egyptian pyramids was not lost to early researchers. If you look at the mound at Cahokia, it resembles a sphinx without a head. Stone burial chambers found in all the Adena mounds were also common to the Egyptians. But a mummy was never found in North America until it was. In Kentucky, a perfectly mummified woman was found inside Mammoth Cave. she was buried inside a stone chamber in a sitting position. This led to speculation that ancient Egyptians had traveled to North America and became the mound builders. The mummy was photographed and sent to the Smithsonian, but today the Smithsonian has no record of its existence. There were rumors of a cave in the Grand Canyon where Egyptian-like artifacts were found by a Smithsonian researcher. This G.E. Kincaid, the cave and the artifacts, if they ever existed, are lost to history. In 1982, a man named Russell Burroughs claimed to have found Egyptian artifacts in a southern Illinois cave. In it were ancient statues, tablets, armor, swords, and bodies of the dead in elaborate burial vaults. Now known as the Legend of Burroughs Cave, neither the cave or the artifacts were ever authenticated. All are lost to history. There was much more evidence that pointed to Mesoamerica, from the ancient people of Mexico to South America. Though a great deal of evidence seemed to support this conclusion, archaeologists have dismissed it as fantasy. But a little museum in Kentucky might just be the smoking gun. Just outside Wycliffe, Kentucky, is the Wycliffe Mounds archaeological site. The grounds have the ruins of an ancient city with numerous mounds. But inside the main building is a complete revelation. This is an actual dig site, covered by a building. Many artifacts were found here and still remain on premises. When I say many, it's the most mound builder artifacts that I've seen anywhere. There are common items from daily life, such as mortars and pestles, blades and points, pottery, and the like. Exquisite ancient artwork. All of them have a very Mesoamerican look. Some are quite odd. But this one in particular stopped me in my tracks. If you didn't know that this came from Kentucky, you'd swear that it was made by the Aztecs, down to the facial expression and loincloth. Is this the smoking gun, an evidence that was hidden in plain sight? It's not so crazy to think ancient people from Mexico took boats to the Mississippi River and traveled north. And along for the ride was culture and technologies that were not here before. I came back to Indiana with a different set of eyes. as you travel across many miles of southern Indiana, you can only wonder if some of the symmetrical hills are actually the work of an ancient people. Geologists are quick to say that glaciers and ancient water created all of these. But what if some of these hills aren't hills at all? What if some of these were made by ancient people, inside holding a wealth of secrets camouflaged by eons of overgrowth? For a fact, some natural hills were simply used instead of made, such as the Sugarloaf Mound at Vincennes. At 40 feet tall, ancient people dug into the side of an existing hill and inserted dead bodies. They were opportunists that saw an easier way. Just across town is the Pyramid Mound. It's technically the tallest burial mound in Indiana at 47 feet tall. The state bought the property for its abundance of sand for road projects, but after digging into the mound and skeletons falling out, it was discovered to be an ancient tomb. Looking at the satellite photos, it seemed like a symmetrical mound and an easy hike. But on the ground, this was only a jungle of foliage. The mound was at the very back of the property and demanded a very steep climb up. It wasn't Mount Everest. It wasn't even Trail 3 at Charlestown State Park. What it was? Adventure. It didn't have a paved walking trail. It didn't have park benches. In fact, I was the only person on the entire property. If I tripped and broke a leg, or fell off and broke my neck, it was all me. Challenge accepted. At the end of this life, I'd rather say, I remember, rather than, I wish I'd done that. This adventure had taken me hundreds of miles, from museums to places over 2,000 years old, and I loved every single minute of it. Some might say that the days of discovery are in the past, but people just keep finding things. Much has been taken by amateur archaeologists, not just in the 1800s when it was perfectly legal, but in modern times. At Mount Vernon, Indiana, there are several documented ancient cities. To name just a few: the Man Site, Ashworth, Hovey Lake Klein, and the Wellborn Village. The latter was found when building the locks and dam where the Ohio and Wabash rivers meet. Even in ancient times, it was a major transportation waterway going down to the Gulf of Mexico. This explains why so many ancient settlements have been found along these rivers, including the Mississippi, where both rivers meet. It also explains why pearls and clamshells from the Gulf of Mexico are found in Indiana burial mounds. At Mount Vernon, Indiana in 1988, at the General Electric Plastic Manufacturing Facility, something very unexpected happened. What was thought to be a large pile of dirt turned out to be the largest Mississippian area burial mound ever found. 410 feet long, 160 feet wide, and 20 feet high. Construction workers with heavy equipment found items made of copper, pearls, silver, and even gold. They took these items home. This was in violation of the 1979 Archaeological Resources Protection Act. A large investigation was conducted, and 5 people were prosecuted. With the items reclaimed, they were reburied where they were found without further study, a true loss to archaeology. Today, the mound sits on private property owned by the Saudi Arabian chemical company, Sabic. Also at Mount Vernon is what looks like a giant platform mound. Its shape is unmistakable, a near replica of the Monk's Mound at Cahokia, only smaller. I contacted the local historical society to confirm if I was right, but they didn't return my call. It might have been made in modern times, or it's something prehistoric, something that certain groups hope you forget. Sometimes ancient sites aren't buried in the weeds, but under ages of dirt in a modern city. The year was 2021, and a construction crew was building the Bartholomew County Judicial Building at Columbus, Indiana. After heavy equipment began excavating, they ran into something quite mysterious: skeletons. Lots of skeletons. A forensics team was contacted from the Bartholomew County Police Department, but the people found here had been dead much too long for a homicide investigation. An archaeology team from the University of Indianapolis came to the site. The skeletons were at least 3,000 years old, the ancient Adena people. They sifted dirt down to 6 feet, finding not only more human remains, but numerous other artifacts. Human and animal bones were mixed, and both had tool marks on their surface. In other words, both were on the menu. It wasn't the only prehistoric site in Bartholomew County. In July of 1995, at the McCullough's Run Housing Addition, workers unearthed a large number of artifacts. This included the remains of 18 ancient people, all of which had been cremated. And near Highway 65, when digging a retaining pond, yet another prehistoric settlement was discovered. As more land is developed for housing additions and businesses that has never been developed before, the layers of history will reveal themselves. If you meet the right people and don't seem like a person that chisels their name all over nature, they might just tell you about the secret places. Such as here in the Hoosier National Forest. This is where the very ancient people lived. And underneath this cathedral-like arch, both skeletons and artifacts were found in a cave. It's like a holy place, my favorite of anywhere I've ever been. Between Paoli and French Lick, a cave opens to a majestic atrium. In my mind's eye, I can envision an ancient council room, but often your mind can play tricks on you. It's called pareidolia, where you start to make out patterns where there are none. Take for instance this rock formation. With a little imagination, it looks like a carved bird. And on the bottom, a serpent. much like the serpent mounds of Ohio and Indiana. But most likely, it's nothing but a rock. And right below it is probably not where a shaman once lived, coming out to dispense wisdom and magic. Inside the cave itself, on the ceiling, are what looks like prehistoric drawings, obscured by moisture and time. But perhaps just natural processes. Truth be told, we'd all like to find something that no one has before. People often send me pictures of what they think are prehistoric relics. Sometimes I see an artifact, and sometimes wishful thinking. Perhaps Indiana still has many secrets and untold treasures, just waiting for a brave soul to find. I can assure you, it does.